What if you could send all of your critical data, like the product image, the product description, to the customer right away when the page loads, and then load the non-critical data, like comments or reviews, later, and have it all stream off of the server? No client-side JavaScript to make any of that happen. Intrigued? Well, you can get it right now with React 18 and also the new support for the streaming API in NextJS 13 and Remix with its deferred API. Interested? Well, I'm going to show you how to do this in all three of those. We're going to do a Next.js version, we're going to do a Remix version, and we are going to build our own DIY SSR server and then streaming SSR server. It is a fantastic way to end our 2022 video series and give you the skills that you'll want to have going into 2023. Let's get right into it. So here's the application that we're going to make. It's not much to look at. I get it. But watch this. If I refresh this page, we'll see that the comment section down here asynchronously loads. And that's not happening with a client-side request. Oh no, all of that is happening from the server. So in fact, it takes this page about 2.5 seconds to load, but it does it in a staggered fashion. We first get the critical data, the header, the footer, the product description, and then we get the non-critical data. And all of it is still interactive. We can still add comments down into our comments section. It's just like a normal page, except that you get to decide what the critical and the non-critical pieces of data are, and React now supports all of this. So one thing I want to mention before we get into it, yeah, I know this is a pretty simplistic example. The reason that I did that was because I personally don't like to go and kind of dig through these really well done, super styled examples looking for the one thing that I'm interested in. In this case, the difference between how to load data in a critical fashion, like this product information ready for SEO, in a non-critical fashion, like these comments, I just want it right there. And so the code that you'll have today is going to be a very lightweight example, just like this one. So, okay, let's get into it. And I am going to go and build out our Next.js application. So let's bring up VS Code. All right, so what I'm going to do is build our Next.js application on the latest version that's going to give us 13 with MPX. Then I'm going to ask for the experimental app directory and for it to be called the Next.js version. So in the completed source code that's on GitHub and available to you for free, there'll be 4 directories, one with the DIY starter, as you see right there. That's what we use to kind of seed our DIY version. There's the Next.js version, which we're going to build right now. There's the Remix version that we build in the next segment. And then finally, there'll be the DIY version, which will be the completed DIY version that we start with basic SSR, and then we go into streaming SSR. All right, let's build out our Next.js version. We will go for TypeScript, and we'll go for ESLint. All right, let's go in there. Start it up. And we'll take a look. Okay, cool. Let's go and trim this down so we get a good starting point. We'll take out all the global CSS. Take out all the page module CSS. In the page, get rid of basically everything. Okay, let's go for it. And there we got absolutely nothing. Perfect. All right, so let's start off with a minimal CSS that we want to bring in. Over here in global CSS, we'll just bring in a body styling, gives us sans serif, and then a little bit of styling around the header and footer to make them blue so they kind of pop. All right, let's go back over to our page, which is where the action is going to begin. And for the page, we're going to start with the critical data. So the stuff that we want to load right away off the server, and that would be everything minus the comments. So we'll have our header, we'll have our product description, we'll have a description that we're going to go get, and then we're going to have our footer. And then in the section down here, we're going to have our comments. So we need a fake way to go and get our description, but do it as an asynchronous fetch. So here's a simple function, fetch description. It returns a promise, And that promise has a timeout on it that resolves to giving us the product information ready for the SEO. And it takes 100 milliseconds. So we're kind of assuming a fairly decent back-end API there. It's going to give us our information that we need for the product in 100 milliseconds. All right, so now we need to go get that. So we're going to use an await inside of home because it's a React server component. We can do that. But in order to do that, we need to make this an async function. And then all we need to do is just get the description. And we can use an await to do that. Now it's still complaining because it's in TypeScript and it doesn't know what it is. So we're going to assign it to a string. You could also do string up there if you wanted. That's fine. Let's take a look. All right, perfect. A good starting point. So now let's work on the comments. So for the comments, I'm going to create another server component called comments. And it's going to also be an asynchronous component called comments. And we're going to put the comments down into this unordered list or UL. Now to go get those comments, we'll create a new fetch comments function. It's just like the last one, except that it returns an array, comment 1, comment 2, comment 3, and it takes significantly longer. It takes 2 seconds. This is not our favorite API. This is a slow-moving comments API, and that's why we want to consider it non-critical, and we don't want to block the page on this nasty, janky 2-second comment fetch. All right, so the next thing we want to do is go get those comments, and then, of course, we want to render them. All right, now, of course, we have to integrate this into the page. So let's go take this over into the page. And we'll import it. And then we'll use it. But of course, now we're getting an issue where it says, well, this isn't a JSX component. It's not returning a JSX element. It's actually returning a promise to an element. And that's not going to work. Well, it actually does work because we're using React server components. Just the TypeScript and ESLint don't know that. So what we need to do is we need to tell TypeScript is actually okay. So we add in an expect error, and we say, well, we expect the error that you're going to tell us, which is it's an async server component, but it's okay. It's actually going to work. So let's hit save now and try it out. And we'll hit refresh. And what we're not seeing there is it actually takes the 2 seconds, and we're not getting that asynchronous loading. So the way that we do that is we wrap that comments in a suspense. Now with the suspense, you get to define a fallback. And the fallback is the UI to use in place of that component until that component loads. So I'm just going to use loading for that. But for you, I would recommend doing some kind of skeleton, something that's going to give the customer some view of what the thing is going to be before it gets there. Now let's try it. Boom. And we can see that we got a really fast page refresh and then the loading and then the comments. And that all took about the 2 seconds that it took to go and get that data. But the page returned in the first 100 milliseconds because that's how long it took to get that critical data and then send out the page. And so we get a very fast initial page serve, but then we get the additional data, but we keep all of that logic right on the server, which is really cool if you don't want to kind of blend the client and the server and have the client go off and make requests back to the server to get this kind of async behavior. In this case, what's happening is the server actually keeps the connection open for the entire time while it's waiting for those comments. And then once the comments arrive, then it finally closes up the page. All right. So now we do want to go and add some interactivity to it. So let's go and add on the text field inside the comments. So now adding the text field is going to require some state. That is state to manage the value of that text field. So let's bring in useState. And then down my component, I'm going to define some state for that comment. That's going to be a new comment and set new comment coming out of useState. Let's hit save and try it out. And we get this bingo, bango, bongo, huge error. We can actually see a little bit better over in the console over here. And it basically says, hey, you're inside of a React server component, and inside of a React server component, you can't use things like useState, useEffect, because that is client-side stuff. And we want React server components to be purely server-based. So what we need to do is we need to have this server component go and get the data and then pass it off to a client-side component. So what we need to do now is create a client-side component called editable comments that's going to be wrapped by this server-side component, and we'll just send it those comments. All right, so I'm going to copy all of this code, take it over here to editable comments, paste it in, and we'll get rid of a few things. We don't need the comments fetch. This is definitely not going to be an async function. And what we are going to do is we're going to get the comments. So we're going to get them as a property. And it's going to be an array of strings. All right, so this seems like a good start. And let's call this editable comments. And we'll bring it into comments. We'll get rid of the useState here. And of course down here. And then we'll just use the editable comments as the output of our comments. And let's give it the comments. All right, let's go take a look. All right, we're still getting the error. And why is that? Well, if we take a look back at editable comments, NextJS 13 assumes that every component is going to be a React server component unless it's told otherwise. And the way that you indicate that it is a client component is you put a string at the top of the file that says use client. And now it works. All right, let's bring in a text field. So we give it the value of the new comment, and then we give it an onChange handler that sets that new comment. Take a look. Looks pretty good, and it is client-side interactive. Great. And so let's go add a button to add that to the list of comments. But of course, we can't mutate this list of comments, so we need to create some new state that is a copy of that list of comments. And it's going to take the original comments as a seed, but it can't use the same name. So I'm going to call these original comments. Okay, looks good. So now finally we need to add our button. And in the onClick handler, we're going to add the comment to the state version of the comments. And then we're going to set the new comment to an empty string. And then we'll wrap that up. And we'll call it add comment. Thank you, GitHub Copilot. All right, let's see. And we're done. Awesome. Okay, so this is a working NextJS 13 version. You see not just how to load critical data right away, you also see how to use suspense to go and load non-critical data in a streamed manner later with the comments. And of course, now you understand the differentiation between React server components and the client-side components and how you can't use the client-side behaviors like useState and useEffect in a React server component. You need to have a corresponding client component that you can send that data to that's going to do that work for you. All right. Next thing to do is try this out in Remix. Okay, so let's close this up. Go back into our console. Go up a directory. Now, I do want to thank Jacob Ebby for his help on this. Jacob Ebby is a member of the Remix team, and he's working on this deferred functionality. He assures me that the API here isn't going to change, even if we are kind of at the bleeding edge of Remix on this one. Hopefully, this functionality should come out as part of their basic, standard Remix in early 2023. All right, so hopefully that's the case when you're watching this. So let's create our Remix app. And we will use the deferred branch for that. So that's going to give us this defer function and an await component that we're going to use to make this really happen. So let's create this. So we'll say just the basics, and we use their Remix app server. We'll say TypeScript, and we want to install. All right, let's go in there. Now, one thing I want to do before I get into this is I actually want to change out the React version. So the React version that comes out of the box here is 18.2, and I want to be on a version of 18.3 that has use. So I'm going to go and replace those with an 18.3 branch that is on the next release. That's not Next.js, that's just the next, essentially, release. And on this day and those days forward, now we have use. Yeah, okay. So let's go back into our terminal and do yarn. People always ask me why I use yarn as opposed to npm or pnpm. It's literally just habit at this point, honestly. But if you have a really good compelling case for pnpm or npm, please let me know in the comments. All right, let's start it up. And we can see that it's got the basic welcome to Remix. Cool. There is a lot of hydration error. That's to be expected. Apparently, there are some issues right now that are going to be resolved before that first release. That's not too much to worry about. In fact, let's just put that away because we're going to get a lot of those. All right, so let's go close that up. And now we're going to bring in our CSS. So we're going to create a new folder called styles. And into there, we're going to create a file called global.css and put in our global CSS. All right, so the next thing we need to do is bring in our global styles and also export a function called links that tells Remix that we have a style sheet link with the styles. Cool. Now let's bring in our API functions. These are just as we had before. We have our fetch description that takes 100 milliseconds and a comments fetch that takes 2000 milliseconds. And let's bring in everything around the description. So now we need to go and get that description and bring it into the page. So the way that we do that is kind of similar to what you might expect in the pages directory in Next.js 13. There is a function called loader, which is the equivalent of get server-side prompts in Next.js. So let's export that function. It's going to be an async function because we're going to use await. So let's go and await that fetch of description. And then loader simply returns an object that has the data that you want to send to the component. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, but now we need to go and get that description in our component. So how do we do that? Well, we use a hook that comes with Remix called use loader data. And wouldn't you know it, it returns the data from the loader. So let's go use that. And now down the component, all we need to do is just invoke use loader data and get the data out of it and then get the description. Let's try it out. Ta-da! So easy. I love Remix. It's really nice. All right, but now we want to go get those comments. So up here, instead of doing an await to go and get the comments, we really just want to get the comments as a promise, not as the data, as a promise. Now, we can't pass a promise as just part of the prompts like that. We need to bring in that new defer function that comes in with this branch and will be released later in the year. So let's go and import that. We bring it in from Remix run node. And now we just wrap our object in that defer. Cool. Now that comments promise is essentially marshaled through to the application. The only gotcha in this is that whatever the output of that promise is needs to be JSON serializable, because that's going to be the marshaling technique that Remix is going to use behind the scenes for us. All right, so now we're going to get it out of the loader data. And let's go bring in that component that we had before for the comments. So this is exactly what we had before. It's the comments, got the original comments, it's a string, and we have all of the state management and all of that. So it's just as what we had before. Now let's go bring in use state to make this work. All right, cool. So let's go use this. Let's go bring it down to our code. Hit save and see what happens. All right, so we see that comments.map is not a function. Well, comments.map doesn't exist on a promise, which is what comments is. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that that component doesn't render until that promise is ready. And the way that we do that is we wrap it in a suspense. Of course, we need to bring in suspense. Let's see if that works. And no, it's still got the same error. And that's because, hey, cool, you've waited until the promise has resolved, but it still doesn't have that map on it because it's still just a promise that we have. We need to go and get that. So what we can do is we can bring in use. And this is where use gets really handy. I was actually not a fan of use when I saw it first come out. Like, yeah, do we really need this? We have React Query, we have SWR. Do we really need this use hook? Actually, yeah, we really need it. And it's for stuff like this. Okay, let's go back in here and we'll bring in now use. And now we can just use the original comments variable here. But really, let's rename this because it's not quite original comments. It is a comment promise. That makes it a little bit easier to follow. And then let's wrap that in a use. And of course, we need to say that's a string array. Cool. Looks like it's going to be okay. Let's give it a try. And ta-da! There we go. And it works a treat. So yeah, use comes in really handy here. If I didn't have use, I'd have to use something like a use effect with a then on it and some state management. In this case, using use is absolutely perfect because it's exactly what we want. We have a promise, it's got the data, just give us that data. And of course, we use the suspense back here to make sure that we only render that comment when that data is ready. And Remix is managing all of that for us. It's going and using that defer up here to marshal that promise, and it's doing all of the magic on both the server and also on the client to make this happen. And of course, it's all streaming, so we get the exact same effect that we got with NextJS 13, where all of the critical data comes in first, and then the non-critical data that you define, what's critical and non-critical, is done asynchronously through this promise mechanism. Super cool. But I've got a question for you. Are you the type of person that likes to really understand how things work under the hood? Well, I am. So in our next section, we are going to do a DIY version of this and go all the way back to React 18 and Express and build this thing for ourselves. Let's get into it and build our DIY version. All right, let's close this all up. Go back into our terminal, go up a directory, and I'm going to copy that DIY starter into the DIY version directory. And that's what you'll see on GitHub as you go and look at the code that's presented to you, of course, for free, as we always do on this channel. All right, let's go into our DIY version and see what we've got. We use yarn dev to start it up. And it's also on port 3000. And I hit refresh. Wow, we got a lot, actually. But it's not client-side interactive. So there's a piece here that's missing. So let's go take a look at how this is all structured and why we've kind of started right in the middle of this. So, okay, so let's go take a look over at our DIY version. And we can see, starting at the package.json, how this starts to work. So we've got the React 18 version that has use in it. Cool. And then we've got some cool scripts in here. We've got a dev script that concurrently runs the client dev script down here and the server dev script up here. The client dev script just runs Webpack. And the Webpack builds this source directory for us. And I'll get into the source directory in just a second. And then the server dev runs the server.js file down here and uses Babel node for that. So that's going to give us the transpilation from the import syntax that we use in the React code into the require syntax you would need for Node. So let's go take a look at server.js and see what it's doing. So server.js is just firing up Express, getting a render function from the server directory. We'll get into that in a second. It's going to create an Express server, put onto it a /endpoint that's going to use that render function. And then we're also going to serve out the static directories of build and public. So build is where Webpack is going to go build its bundle of app, HTML, and index. And public is just going to have our CSS in it. And then finally, we just fire up the server by listening on that port. You can define what port you want by using an environment variable, or we default to 3000. Cool. Let's go take a look at render and see what it's doing. So render has our cool fetch description and comments fetch, just like we did before. And the function itself does an await on both of those. So we fully await that full, 100 milliseconds plus 2000 milliseconds. We're doing it one right after the other, so 2100 milliseconds or 2.1 seconds. And then we rendered a string, the components, the HTML component, and then the app component. And we take that string and we send it back to Express using the send method on the response object. And then over here, we include our HTML component and our app component. So let's go take a look first at our HTML component. So our HTML component, it's given the comments and the description as well as the children, which would be the app, but it doesn't actually do anything with the comments and the description, which is a problem. We'll get to in a second. It then brings in that CSS and it then puts our app, and the app is what we've come to know and love. So we've got our app, it's got the header, it's got the footer, it's got the product description, the comments, and so on and so forth. And the comments up here, it's exactly what we've seen in the other one. So the app is pretty much identical to what we have on Next and on Remix. Problem though, so we're not actually getting the client-side functionality. The initial render works just fine. So why aren't we getting any client-side functionality? Well, we're not getting any client-side functionality because we never actually have a script that brings in the bundle that we've created. And the bundle that we created, let's go take a look, is in a directory called build. And the name of it is main.js. It doesn't show up in my VS Code, but that's because my VS Code is set to ignore directories like node modules and build, because those generally just have temporary files in them. So that's why we're not seeing it over there. I had to go take a look, and it's kind of in this hidden directory. Okay, so we've got this build directory. It's being served by server over here as a static directory. So what we need to do is just script in main.js, and then that'll bring in our client-side code. So we go over here to our HTML and we bring in our script tag. And we give it a source of that main.js. And there you go. Let's rerun it. With this particular setup, it's not really hot reloading or doing any of that cool stuff. It's very bare bones. So I'm going to need to reboot this server a bunch of times. All right, let's take a look. And now, what's going on here? Okay, so what's going on is we can see over in the console, this text content does not match server rendered HTML. And more importantly, we look down at the bottom here, there was an error while hydrating. And because that error is happening outside of a suspense boundary, the entire route will switch to client-side rendering. And that's, if you look really closely, and I'm not sure our screen capture is going to get this, but you can actually see the content flash on there for a second. And let's go into the terminal and you'll see this actually in a bit more detail. So I create a new terminal. We can see if I curl it, we actually do get all the comments. You can see comments here, and then comment 1, comment 2, comment 3. We even get the product information ready for SEO. It's all there. But what's happening is we then run the client-side code, and the client-side code doesn't have the comments or the description. So to really understand what's happening here, we need to look at index.js. because index.js is the root of the bundle that we're sending to the client. And it is what runs on the client. And that's really the trick when it comes to understanding how SSR works, because you're actually running your application 2 times in 2 different environments. You're running it once on the server during SSR or server-side rendering, and then you're running it again on the client. And this is the code that runs on the client. Now, the code that runs on the client says, cool, I don't have any comments and I don't have any description. And so what happens is you get this really good server-side rendered result that has all of the data in it. But then we replace it with no comments and no description on the client. And this is the problem that's plagued React SSR from the beginning. You have to have on the client the data somewhere so that the client-side app can get that data and then re-render appropriately. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here to our HTML.js, and before we call our client-side bundle, we're going to create another script tag that creates a variable on window, something like __ data, that has the comments and the description. So let's go build that. So we have our script tag. We're going to dangerously set in our HTML with this window __ data, where we have a JSON stringify of the description and the comments. And then we'll run our bundle. So what we can do is we can take that window data, go over here to our index.js, and for the comments, we can use window data.comments. And for the description, we can use window data.description. Let's rerun it. And hit refresh. And it works. And before you're like, oh my God, Jack, that is the hackiest thing I've ever seen in my life. We would never, ever do that. I can't believe you do that. That is the worst thing. Oh my God, I'm never going to watch your channel again. You're terrible. NextJS has been doing this for years. Any SSR framework in React has been doing this for years. This is how this works. If you look at the pages coming out of your Next app, they'll have Next data as a window variable that has all of that data. And that's what we've been dealing with for years. You basically, when you output a page, you have the formatted HTML coming out of SSR that has all of the data in it. But then you have another whole copy of the data, everything that came out of get server-side props in something like Next data or whatever. Every different SSR framework handles this in a different way, but they all have to do it because they all have to have the data available for the client-side code to be able to re-render the page. And unless those 2 things render exactly the same, you'll get the hydration error and you won't get anything at all, like what we just saw there. Oof, man, nasty, right? And it'll even get a little weirder and twistier as we get into doing this as a renderable stream, which we're going to do right now. But if you're already confused, maybe actually you just want to go and stop right here, kind of run back through this again, because it is really weird thinking about the fact that you have 2 completely different execution contexts. You got the SSR context, and you've got the client context, and this is what it takes to make that client context work and match what you got out of the server context. Okay, let's continue on. Okay, so over here in render, we're going to change out render to string to render to pipeable stream. Woo, love it. And we're going to get rid of this res send. And we're going to change render to string to render to pipeable stream. Now, this isn't a complete example that has all of the error handling and all of that you really would need in a production server. This is just a trimmed down version so we can kind of understand how this whole thing works. And the only thing that we're going to use as an option in here is on shell ready. Basically says, hey, I've got content. I need to put it somewhere. So we need to pipe the result of this stream into the express response object. And the only thing we need to do is get that stream. So where does that stream come from? Well, it comes from render to pipeable stream. So we need to grab that as the output and say, cool, we'll take this stream and then pipe it into the express response object. Okay, but to not go insane, we are going to remove the main.js for the moment. We're not going to deal with the client side of things. Let's just deal with the server side of things first. And also let's get rid of comments here. Just that's enough. That's cool. All right, let's see how we do. All right, let's go over here to our console and rerun and refresh. And it works. We don't have any client-side interactivity. Well, that's cool. But we're also blocking, which is not great. We've done all of this work to go make our pipeable stream. We're not actually using it because we're still blocking in the render here on the comments. So what we really want to do is just have that as comments. So let's see what we need to do that. Let's try again. And now we never get anything because we get an error coming out of here. And the error is that comments.map is not a function. Sound familiar? Yeah, there's no .map on a promise, and comments fetch returns a promise. So, okay. So let us go over into our comments function and see what we need to do. So now we got that original comments. Let's go and use the trick that we used in Remix to bring in use. And we'll just use our original comments. And we'll call that the comments promise. All right, let's see how that works. And it works. It takes about 2100 milliseconds though, which is not what we want. So we still want to use that suspense thing to make sure that React knows that you've got basically an async component in there. So let's go and wrap that comments in a suspense. Let's try again. Told you, this is DIY stuff right here. And now we get the loading and it works, which is really cool when you think about it, because we haven't actually put a bundle in there. We don't have main.js. So how is this working? That's a really good question. So let's go over into our Visual Studio Code, create a new terminal, and we'll use curl on this thing. We'll kind of see if we can tease this out. So we'll curl localhost, and okay, so that doesn't seem all that magic. It waited the 2.1 milliseconds, and there you go. But what if instead I do the same curl, but I ask it not to buffer? Now we see, boom, we get the data right away, and then we get the additional data. That's what's happening. This is what the browser sees. It gets, boom, a bunch of HTML. Go render that, bang. And then later on, after the 2 seconds, boom, it gets the rest of the data, and it says, cool, now we need to go render that. But that's only half the story. There's a bunch of script that's coming in here. What is that doing, and where is that coming from? Well, it's coming from React, but let's go take a look at actually what it's doing. So let's do our curl, and we'll pipe it through something called pb copy. What that does is put the output of this command into the paste buffer. So paste buffer copy. And then I'll just create a new editor, paste out the paste buffer that we just got, and then I'll format the results. Cool. It auto-detected that it's HTML. Thank you very much, VS Code. So here's what's happening. So we get the initial output all the way up to there, I think, right about there, right? So that's the initial block that we saw in that first 100 milliseconds. It's got the product information ready for SEO. But for the comments section, it's got this weird comment, and then it's got the div that it's going to put in there automatically before the promise is fulfilled. And then it's got a template, and that template is given an ID of B0. All of this is what React 18 is doing for us. Then once the promise is fulfilled, so sometime later, we get this additional div. So this is the rendered comments. Now that we have fulfilled that promise, it's given the ID of S0. And then down here, React has gone and automatically generated a script with this $RC, which I'm going to guess stands for replace component. And it then invokes it down here and it says, well, replace component B0 with S0. So S0 is what it just output and B0 is where it wants you to put it. And this is really cool, right? So you can put these suspense blocks wherever you want in the hierarchy. It's not like you think about a page, right? And it's like, oh, well, we have to block everything. So we have to block the footer because we're not done. And yeah, no. You can put these suspense blocks wherever you want, anywhere on the page. And React is going to do all of the legwork of getting those into the right spot at the right time for you. And you don't even need to run any client-side code for that. So if you want to have a pure SSR server where you don't run any client-side bundle, that will still work with this suspense rendering stuff, which is mind-blowing. Of course, you can't actually have a no JavaScript environment here because you still need to run this small RC script to actually get the content into the right spot. You didn't have to write it, but you do have to be able to run it, so this client has to have JavaScript enabled. Okay, cool. So now that we've got the server-side version of the pipeable stream all running, now we need to go and see if we can go get the client-side bundle in there so that we can get our client-side interactivity working. So let's see what that's going to take. And this is where it gets really twisty, by the way. So let's bring in our main.js. And let's see what we got. So if we reboot our server, and then try again, let's see what happens. So, whoa. Okay, so we get an unsupported type was passed to use, undefined. Okay, let's take a look. So we'll go over here to our Visual Studio Code, and we'll see what's happening over in index, because index is trying to send comments, which is now undefined because all we've set here is an object that contains only description. And then over here in app, we're sending on comment. The comment promise is undefined. So yeah, user's not going to like that. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to have a promise. So that's the first thing we need to create. We need to have a comments promise. Cool, right? But this promise is never going to resolve. So we need a way for the server code to tell the client code, hey, I've got your data, resolve that promise. So the way that we can do that is we can create a new function on window that will resolve this promise with some data. So we give it some comments, and it's just going to resolve with those comments. It's kind of like the equivalent of window.data, but for promises. Okay, so now we got our window.set comments. Now we need to, over in our HTML, actually use that. All right, so this is where it gets really twisty, because we're going to have effectively the script version of that blocking component on the server. So we'll have a suspense. The fallback is going to be an empty script. I think you can just not even have a fallback if you wanted to. And then in there, we're going to have a comment script. That's going to take that comment promise. And so let's bring in suspense and use. And we'll define our comment script. as taking that comments promise, and then we'll get the comments using a use. And then in the script that we're going to build, we will call that set comments with the output of the comments. Okay, let's try this out. Okay, yarn dev. And there we go. There we go. Whew. Wow. Okay, let's go through this one more time just to see if I can explain it a little bit more thoroughly to the extent that I can. I really think this is one of the ones where you just kind of have to actually like go get the code from GitHub, clone it, try it out, try it in your environment, because it's really hard to kind of mentally go through what's going on here. Okay, so on the server side, then that's the only place where this HTML is run. It's only run on the server. We are doing our usual window data to go and send along the description. Then we are sending out our main.js. And then we are putting a suspense around our comments component. And that fallback there just puts in an empty script, but that comments component, when we have that comments data ready up here, so this comment script is going to throw and throw and throw until comments promise is ready. When it gets it, it's going to emit the code on the server that's then going to call set comments on the client, which we've defined up here inside of our promise. That will in turn resolve this comments promise, which is connected to app, which is doing a use on the client of the client side comments promise, which finally gets you your comments. Whew, wow, pretty cool. And so you can see that there's basically two different ways to handle this hydration on the client. There is the one way, the more traditional way, where you have the window variable that just simply has the data. And then this kind of way that I just created for myself that seems to work. I'm sure there are better ways. That is a way to resolve a promise that makes use of the streaming nature and gives you that client-side interactivity right away. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned a lot more about NextJS 13 streaming or remix streaming if you just want to use those. And if you dug into the DIY with me, you now understand more about how your server has always been doing SSR and how you could implement a streaming SSR yourself if you wanted to. I don't think you should use this code as a good starting point for that. As I say, I didn't add a lot of all the error handling and everything else. Actually, I forked this from a much more complete version that came from the React team. I'll put a link to that in the description as well, so you can use that if you are serious about doing your own version of a streaming server. But as I say, I would recommend using NextJS 13 or Remix to do this because they have done a lot of the legwork for you, and there's really no reason to do that. Of course, I've had a really great time in 2022 making these videos for you, and I've enjoyed all of the comments and all of the likes. And of course, if you have any questions on this video, be sure to put those in the comment section down below. And if you like the video, hit that like button. That's always appreciated. And if you really like the video, hit that subscribe button. We're this close to 100,000 subscribers. It's crazy. I think I started this year with like 30,000 subscribers, and here we are just that close to 100,000 subscribers right at the end here, and I so appreciate it. Thank you so much, and thank you for watching the Blue Collar Coder channel. I can't wait to see y'all in 2023 and cover a lot of cool new topics. See you then.